Where the land slows the heart. Evan used to believe that moving fast meant moving forward. His life in the city had taught him that. Every morning began with alarms, screens, and noise. His phone buzzed before his eyes were fully open. Messages waited. Tasks waited. People waited. If he slowed down, even for a moment, it felt like something important would slip past him. So he kept going. Faster trains, longer hours, shorter sleep. He told himself this was normal. This was success. By the time he turned 32, his days looked full from the outside. He worked at a firm that paid well and praised hard work. His calendar was always booked. His apartment was neat but lifeless, like a place meant only for resting, not living. He ate most meals alone, often standing, often distracted. Some nights he fell asleep with the light still on, his mind racing even when his body could not keep up. He rarely thought about how tired he was. Tiredness had become his baseline. Everyone around him seemed the same, moving quickly, speaking quickly, living in short bursts between obligations. When people asked how he was doing, he answered with practiced words, busy, good, can't complain. He didn't stop to ask himself if those answers were true. Then the call came. It was late afternoon when his phone rang with a number he almost ignored. When he answered, the voice on the other end was calm but careful. His mother had been taken to the hospital. It was serious, but stable. They wanted family nearby just in case. Evan listened, said the right things, and promised he would come. When the call ended, he stared at his desk for a long time. Around him, the office continued as usual. Phones rang. Printers hummed. Someone laughed in the distance. He realized with a strange clarity that nothing around him had actually changed. The world he lived in kept moving, no matter what happened to him or his family. That thought followed him all the way home. The next morning, Evan packed a small bag and booked a ticket. He wasn't traveling to the city where his mother lived now. She had moved years ago. Instead, he was going to the rural town where she had grown up, where she wanted to recover once she was released. His uncle still lived there, on land that had been in the family for generations. Evan had not been back since he was a teenager. He remembered very little, only wide fields, slow afternoons, and a feeling of being far away from everything. The journey felt longer than it should have. Trains gave way to buses. Roads grew narrower. Buildings thinned out. Signal bars on his phone dropped one by one. Evan checked the time often, as if time itself might behave differently here. He noticed how quiet it became when the engine stopped at the final station. No crowds, no rushing feet, just wind and open space. His uncle met him with an old truck and a simple greeting. There was no long conversation, no questions about work or the city. They drove in silence, broken only by the sound of gravel under tires. Evan looked out the window. The land stretched wide and uneven, dotted with trees and fences. Nothing looked new. Nothing looked rushed. When they arrived, Evan stepped out of the truck and stood still. The air felt different. He couldn't explain how, only that it seemed heavier and lighter at the same time. The house was modest, worn but cared for. It sat quietly, as if it had no need to impress anyone. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he didn't check it right away. Inside, the room smelled faintly of wood and dust. His uncle showed him where he would sleep, then returned to his own routines without ceremony. Evan unpacked slowly, unsure of what to do with himself. There was no schedule waiting for him, no list of tasks, no immediate demand. That night, He lay awake longer than expected. The quiet was not peaceful yet. It felt loud in its own way, filled with sounds he wasn't used to noticing. Insects outside, the wind brushing against the walls, his own breathing. Without screens and noise to distract him, his thoughts grew sharper. He thought about his mother, about how fragile everything suddenly felt. He thought about how little time he had spent slowing down when it mattered. Morning came without an alarm. Sunlight crept into the room gently, not demanding attention. Evan checked his phone out of habit. Messages had piled up overnight. Work questions, missed calls. He felt a familiar pull of urgency, the reflex to respond, to re-enter the pace he knew so well. Instead, he put the phone down. He stepped outside. The land looked different in the morning. Dew clung to the grass. The sky was wide and clear. His uncle was already awake, moving steadily, not quickly, through small tasks. Evan offered to help, unsure how. He was handed simple work. Carry this. Old Dad. No rush. As the hours passed, Evan noticed how time stretched. A single task took longer than he expected, not because it was difficult, but because no one was trying to finish it fast. There were pauses, moments of rest, silence that was not filled for the sake of comfort. At first, it made him uneasy. He kept thinking of all the things he could be doing instead, all the progress he was not making. But something else was happening beneath that restlessness. His body began to respond. His shoulders dropped without him noticing. His breathing slowed. Hunger came at normal times, not rushed between meetings. When they sat down to eat, no one checked the clock. Later that day, they visited his mother, who had arrived earlier. She looked smaller than he remembered, but her eyes were calm. She smiled when she saw him, not with relief, but with warmth. They talked about simple things, the weather, the land, old neighbors. She did not ask about his job. She did not need to. On the way back, Evan felt a weight he hadn't named before. Grief, yes, but also something closer to regret. He wondered how long it had been since he had allowed himself to exist without proving anything. The land did not care what he did for a living. It did not ask for results or explanations. It simply existed, steady and patient. That evening, Evan sat outside as the light faded. The sky changed colors slowly without announcement. He realized that for the first time in years he was not waiting for the next thing. There was nowhere else he needed to be, no version of himself he needed to perform. He still believed this was temporary. A pause, a brief stop before returning to real life. But as the land grew quiet around him, something inside him began to slow as well. He didn't know it yet, but the pace he had trusted for so long was already loosening its hold. Evan woke to the sound of birds singing, a gentle chorus that made no demand on him, yet somehow pulled him from sleep. The sun had already begun to climb slowly in the sky, spilling light across the wide fields outside the window. For a moment he just lay there, listening, breathing, feeling the warmth of the morning, without feeling guilty for doing nothing. In the city, he could never have stayed still this long. Every second had been measured, every action accounted for. But here, in this place, stillness seemed natural, almost necessary. He got up and stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying the scent of earth and grass mingled with smoke from a distant chimney. He took a deep breath and felt it move through his chest, filling him with a strange calm. The world was alive, but it moved on its own rhythm, not dictated by schedules or deadlines. He began to understand that this was what he had been missing: time that belonged to no one, not even himself. His uncle was already busy outside, repairing a broken fence along the edge of the property. He worked with careful, deliberate movements, hammering each nail with a rhythm that seemed to belong entirely to the place. Evan offered to help, unsure of what he could do, but wanting to be part of something steady. His uncle handed him a tool and a piece of wood, and Evan began to work. At first, his movements were awkward, his mind still wandering to unfinished tasks and unanswered emails, but gradually his body began to adjust to the slow, steady pace of the work. Each nail he hammered felt like a small victory, not because it mattered to anyone else, but because it demanded his full attention. By midday, Evan realized he had forgotten to check his phone. No messages, no emails, no reminders. He felt a mix of relief and unease. Relief, because the world had paused for him in this moment. Unease, because he was so used to constant connection that silence felt foreign. But the land was patient. It did not demand that he respond immediately or solve problems at once. It simply waited. And in that waiting, Evan felt a strange sense of freedom. After lunch, he went for a walk along a narrow dirt path that led through the fields behind the house. The grass brushed against his legs, and the wind carried a gentle, steady rhythm that seemed to match his own heartbeat. As he walked, he noticed small details he had never paid attention to before. The way sunlight danced on a patch of wildflowers, the soft hum of insects, the occasional rustle of a deer moving through the trees. Each moment was small and quiet, but together they formed a world that was vivid and alive. Evan realized that in his city life, he had rarely noticed anything at all. The constant rush had made him blind to the beauty that existed in simplicity. He came to a small pond at the edge of the field. The water was clear and calm, reflecting the sky and the trees around it. Evan sat on a nearby rock and watched as a family of ducks swam slowly across the surface. He thought about how fast his life had been, and how little of it he had truly seen or felt. Here, time seemed to stretch, not in minutes or hours, but in experiences. He could sit, watch, and simply exist without pressure, without expectation. The pond, the ducks, the sky, they were not waiting for him to hurry. They were just being. And for the first time in years, Evan felt like he could do the same. When he returned to the house, his mother was sitting on the porch, her hands busy with knitting. She smiled as he approached, and they exchanged quiet greetings. She did not ask about work or deadlines or city life. Instead, she asked simple questions. How is the land? Did you sleep well? Did you eat enough? Evan realized that these questions, though small, felt more important than any report or meeting he had ever attended. They asked not for performance, but for presence. They asked him to be here, now, without pretending to be anyone else. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next, yet each filled with small moments that held weight. Evan helped his uncle with chores, walked the fields, tended to the small garden behind the house, and spent long afternoons talking with his mother. The conversations were not urgent or forced. They moved like the land itself, patient, deliberate, and full of pauses that allowed thoughts to settle. He began to notice changes in himself. His shoulders, once tense from constant strain, relaxed. His thoughts, once racing, began to follow a slower, steadier rhythm. He started to sleep through the night without alarms, waking naturally with the sun. One morning, he accompanied his mother to the small town nearby. The streets were quiet, the stores simple and familiar. People greeted them warmly with smiles and nods, Not expecting explanations or apologies, Evan felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced in the city. Here, life was not about competing or performing. It was about connection, however small, and about noticing the world around him. He realized that in all his years of moving fast, he had rarely felt this sense of being grounded. Back at the house, he spent the afternoon learning small skills he had never tried before. His uncle showed him how to mend fences properly, how to identify which plants needed water, how to move quietly across the fields to avoid disturbing wildlife. Each task required focus and patience, qualities Evan had long ignored. At first he struggled. He was clumsy, impatient, and easily frustrated. But with practice, he began to improve. He discovered a satisfaction in small accomplishments, not because they brought recognition, but because they reflected effort, presence, and care. Evenings were especially quiet. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink as the sun sank behind distant hills. Evan often sat on the porch, watching as the land shifted from day to night. The sounds of the evening, frogs, crickets, distant birds, formed a gentle symphony. In these moments he felt the first hints of something he could not name. It was not happiness in the conventional sense, nor was it relief. It was a deep, calm awareness, a recognition that life did not have to be a race to be meaningful. The land, in its steady, patient way, had begun to teach him how to slow his heart. One day, as he worked alongside his uncle, Evan asked a question he had never thought to ask before. "Did you ever feel like the world was moving too fast?" His uncle paused, leaning on the hammer, and looked out over the fields. "All the time," he said slowly. "But I learned that rushing doesn't get you anywhere you couldn't walk to if you took your time. The land teaches you that, if you listen." Evan nodded, understanding in a way he had never understood words before. Listening, he realized, was not about hearing sounds. It was about paying attention, being present, noticing life as it unfolded. Over the weeks, Evan began to notice subtle shifts in his own habits. He stopped checking his phone first thing in the morning. He learned to wait before responding to messages. He spent longer on simple tasks, savoring the rhythm of work rather than hurrying to finish. He discovered that he could read a book for hours without distraction, that he could sit quietly without feeling restless, that he could simply watch the wind move through the trees without thinking of the next thing he needed to do. Each of these small changes, though seemingly insignificant, added up to something profound. The land was changing him, shaping a version of himself that he had long forgotten. Even when he thought about returning to the city, Evan no longer felt the same pull toward urgency. The constant noise, the pressure, the schedules, he realized they had been draining him without providing true satisfaction. He still valued work and ambition, but he understood now that they were not the only measures of life. There was something deeper, quieter, and steadier, something he could carry with him even when he eventually left this place. The land had shown him that life was not only about moving forward quickly, it was also about standing still, observing, and being present. Nights became moments of reflection. Lying in bed, Evan thought about the people he had been, the places he had been, and the rush that had defined his life for so long. He remembered the city lights, the constant noise, the feeling that he was always falling behind, and he compared it to the fields, the quiet, the rhythm of work and rest. He realized that the land had given him a gift he had not even known he needed: the ability to slow down without fear, to notice without judgment, to exist without proving anything. It was a lesson he knew would stay with him long after he left. As days turned into weeks, Evan felt himself changing in ways he could not fully describe. His heart no longer raced at the thought of deadlines. His thoughts moved more slowly, more deliberately. He laughed more easily, spoke more gently, and felt the weight of the world lift slightly from his shoulders. He began to understand that the land's patience was a mirror for his own life. If he could move at its pace, he could find a peace he had never known. Even small interactions became meaningful. A neighbor stopping by to ask about the weather, a child running past waving, a stranger offering a smile. All of these simple moments reminded Evan that life's value was not measured in speed or productivity, but in presence, attention, and care. He discovered a quiet joy in being part of this slower, steadier world. And for the first time in years, he felt whole. Not complete, perhaps, but real. By the end of the second week, Evan no longer thought of his stay as temporary. He still knew he might return to the city someday, but he understood that he could carry the lessons of this place with him. The land, in its gentle, unhurried way, had begun to slow his heart, teaching him that life could be lived fully without rushing, that presence was more powerful than progress, and that sometimes the most important journey was learning to simply be. Even though the days in the countryside had grown calm and steady, Evan could not escape the unease that sometimes crept in. It was a quiet kind of unease, subtle but persistent, like the shadow of a cloud moving slowly over a bright field. He had begun to enjoy the stillness, to embrace the rhythm of life here, but every now and then his old city habits rose, uninvited. His mind would race ahead, imagining emails he hadn't sent, meetings he had missed, and opportunities slipping by. For a moment, the peace he had been cultivating felt fragile, as if it could shatter if he dared to slow down too much. One morning he woke before sunrise, stirred not by the birds or the wind, but by anxiety. He found himself sitting on the porch steps, staring at the horizon. The sky was dark at first, then slowly blushing with light. The land was silent, holding its breath. Evan felt a pang of guilt. He thought about his life in the city, the people he had ignored, the family he had neglected. The quiet of this place made him face the mistakes he had been avoiding. In the city, noise had been a shield. Here, there was no shield. Only truth, patient and unyielding. After breakfast, he walked to the edge of the property, feeling the earth soft under his boots. His mother was inside, moving slowly through her morning routine. His uncle had gone to tend the distant fields. Evan's steps were measured, but his mind was turbulent. The land was teaching him patience, but it could not erase regret. He realized that slowing down made space for feelings he had long buried. Memories of past failures, missed opportunities, and words left unsaid floated to the surface. He felt the weight of them pressing against his chest. In the middle of the morning, his uncle returned from the fields, carrying a basket of freshly harvested vegetables. He noticed Evan's quiet mood and paused. "Everything all right?" he asked. Evan hesitated. He had spent weeks learning to talk to people slowly, honestly, and without pretense, but this felt different. He didn't want advice. He didn't want a solution. He just wanted acknowledgement. I don't know," he admitted. "I'm feeling a lot." His uncle nodded, setting the basket down. "That's okay," he said simply. "Feeling a lot is part of living. You can't rush through it." He gestured to the land surrounding them. "See that? Trees don't hurry to grow. Rivers don't push themselves. They just do what they're meant to do, at their own pace. Sometimes you have to do the same." Evan listened, letting the words settle. He understood them, yet it was not a sudden revelation. It was more like a door slowly opening, a crack of light in a room he had been afraid to enter. For hours he walked through the fields, letting his thoughts drift and settle. He noticed the small details, the pattern of ants moving across the soil, the gentle sway of wheat in the wind, a rabbit darting between bushes. The world did not demand his hurry. It demanded attention, patience, and respect. By midday, Evan returned to the house to find his mother sitting quietly, reading a book. She looked up and smiled. "You're thinking," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. Evan nodded. "I am," he admitted. He realized he could talk to her here in a way he never could in the city. There was no judgment, no rush, just listening and understanding. He shared a memory from his childhood, one he had never voiced before, about a summer when his mother had taken him to the river and taught him to skip stones. As he spoke, he felt a part of himself opening, a part that had been closed by busyness and fear. In the afternoon, Evan helped his uncle repair a section of fence that had fallen in a storm weeks earlier. The work was simple, yet it demanded focus. Each post had to be aligned, each nail hammered carefully. At first, Evan struggled. His hands were not used to this kind of labor. He was clumsy and impatient, wishing he could finish quickly and move on. But his uncle did not rush him. He worked alongside him, showing, correcting, and letting Evan find his rhythm. By the time the sun was high in the sky, the fence stood straight, sturdy, and complete. Evan felt a quiet pride, not in the speed of completion, but in the care and attention it had taken. As evening approached, Evan went for another walk, this time along a small creek that ran through a neighboring field. The water moved slowly, weaving between rocks and reeds. He knelt at the edge and watched his reflection ripple in the current. For the first time, he saw clearly how the city had shaped him, always moving, always racing, always measuring success in what could be done next, rather than what was happening now. He realized that his old life had been a blur of motion, a constant attempt to outrun himself. The land had slowed him, forced him to face the person he had become and to consider the person he might still be. One night, Evan had a dream. He was running through the city, streets endless, lights blinding, faces rushing past him. Every step felt frantic, yet no progress was made. He woke with his heart pounding, realizing the dream had been a memory more than a fantasy. It was a reminder of what he had left behind and why he had come here. The city, he understood, was not evil. It was simply a place that demanded speed, and he had forgotten how to be still. The next day, he decided to take a long walk alone, farther than he had ever gone before. He followed a path that wound through hills, forests, and open fields. Hours passed, yet he did not worry about time. He noticed the small signs of life: a bird building a nest, a fox watching him from a distance, the smell of wildflowers carried on the wind. With each step, his heart felt a little lighter, his thoughts a little clearer. He realized that slowing down did not mean stopping. It meant noticing, understanding, living. When he returned home, his mother asked how he felt. Evan hesitated, then spoke honestly. "I feel unsettled, but in a way that makes sense," he said. "It's like I'm facing things I've been avoiding for years." She nodded. "The land has a way of doing that," she said. "It doesn't give you answers. It just gives you space to find them yourself." Over the next few days, Evan noticed a pattern in himself. He would wake with the sun, spend hours helping with chores or walking the land, and then spend evenings reflecting, writing in a small notebook he had brought. He wrote about the things he remembered, the things he feared, the things he hoped for. Writing, he realized, was another way of slowing down. It forced him to pay attention, to organize his thoughts, and to confront emotions he might otherwise have ignored. One afternoon, while walking through a meadow, Evan came across an old tree. Its trunk was wide, gnarled with age, roots tangled and strong. He rested against it, feeling the rough bark against his back. For a long time, he just sat, listening to the wind in the leaves. He thought about his life, about mistakes and regrets, about the constant pressure he had placed on himself, and he understood something fundamental. Slowing down did not mean weakness. It did not mean surrender. It meant strength. The strength to face oneself honestly, without distraction or denial. Evan's nights became times of quiet reflection. He no longer worried about what had been left behind. Instead, he focused on understanding himself. Memories came unbidden. Childhood afternoons with his mother, early failures at school, friendships he had neglected. He allowed himself to feel sadness, guilt, and longing, but he also allowed moments of joy and appreciation for the present. He began to understand that the land was not only slowing his heart, it was reshaping it. One day, a neighbor invited Evan to help with a small harvest. He hesitated, unsure if he wanted to leave the familiar paths of his uncle's land, but he agreed, and the work became another lesson in patience and focus. The neighbor showed him techniques he had never known, shared stories of the town, and treated Evan not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged, opening his eyes. For the first time in years, Evan felt connected, not to deadlines or status, but to people and work that had real meaning, that required care and attention. Even small, ordinary moments began to feel extraordinary. Sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the clouds drift across the sky, listening to the soft sound of the creek nearby, these became the highlights of his days. He realized that life had always been full of such moments, but in the city he had been too busy to notice. Now, each moment mattered. He was learning to treasure the ordinary, the simple, the slow. By the end of the third week, Evan felt a deep shift within himself. He was no longer the man who had arrived in the countryside restless and anxious. He was calmer, more patient, more aware. Yet he also recognized the challenge that remained. Slowing down was not easy, especially when the world beyond this place still moved quickly. He understood that the lessons he learned here were fragile. They required attention, effort, and a willingness to face discomfort, but he also knew that he could carry them with him if he chose. Evan's journey was not complete. He still had fears, regrets, and uncertainties, but he was learning to live with them, to allow them space without letting them control him. The land had taught him that life was not only about motion, speed, and achievement. It was about presence, awareness, and the courage to face oneself honestly. And with each passing day, he felt his heart slow, not in fear, but in understanding, ready to move forward, but not without first learning to stand still. The days continued to unfold slowly, like the gentle turning of pages in a book that had been waiting for him all along. Evan found himself rising with the sun more easily now. The light seeped through the windows of the small house, painting the walls gold, and for the first time he felt he could breathe deeply without thinking about what came next. The land was no longer something new to him. It was a rhythm he could follow, a heartbeat that mirrored his own. One morning he accompanied his uncle and mother to the market in the nearby town. The streets were quiet, almost empty, but the people they met moved with a calm familiarity. Shopkeepers greeted them by name, children waved from doorways, and neighbors stopped to chat about the weather or the state of crops. Evan noticed how different this was from the city, where everyone seemed in a rush, and even greetings felt hurried and rehearsed. Here, conversations were slow, and silence was allowed between words. Listening mattered more than speaking. He found himself savoring each interaction, noting the small details, the laugh of a child, the way an old man carefully stacked vegetables, the scent of fresh bread drifting from a nearby bakery. Every ordinary moment seemed filled with meaning. Back at the house, Evan took on more work in the garden. He learned to identify the plants that needed water, those that were ready to harvest, and those that needed more care. At first, it was challenging. The land demanded patience and attention. If he hurried, he made mistakes. But with practice, he began to feel the satisfaction of doing things correctly. Every plant he nurtured seemed to reward him with growth. Every task completed with care brought him a quiet sense of accomplishment. He was learning that life, like the land, could not be rushed. The result was not immediate, but the process itself mattered. One afternoon, Evan took a long walk into the hills behind the house. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of earth and leaves. He followed a narrow path that wound upward, feeling the rise and fall of the land beneath his feet. As he climbed, he began to reflect on the changes he had experienced since arriving. The constant pressure, the relentless speed, the anxiety that had followed him from the city. These things felt distant now. He understood that the land had not only slowed his body and mind, but also his heart. He felt lighter, calmer, and more connected to the world around him. Along the path, he came across a small clearing where sunlight streamed through the trees, creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the ground. He sat down on a rock, letting the warmth of the sun touch his face. The land seemed alive in a way he had never noticed before. Birds flitted through the branches, insects moved quietly in the undergrowth, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. So, Evan realized that this place had become a teacher for him, guiding him not with words, but with presence and patience. He began to understand that true strength was not measured by speed or achievement, but by the ability to remain present, to face life with calm attention. That evening, Evan stayed outside longer than usual. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, slowly fading into deep blue. Stars began to appear, scattered across the heavens like tiny sparks of light. He sat quietly, listening to the land around him. The soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the gentle whisper of wind across the fields. In this stillness, he realized that he had been searching for peace in the wrong places all his life. The city, with all its noise and movement, had promised success and fulfillment, but it had only left him restless. Here, in the quiet, he found something deeper: clarity, understanding, and a sense of belonging. The next day brought a storm. Rain fell steadily, drumming on the roof and washing the fields with water. Many would see storms as inconvenient, but Evan saw it differently. He stepped outside, letting the rain soak his clothes and hair, feeling the cool drops on his skin. The storm was alive, powerful, and patient, much like the land itself. He realized that life, too, could be stormy, but storms were not meant to be feared. They were meant to be experienced, understood, and survived. The storm reminded him that slowing down did not mean avoiding challenges. It meant facing them with attention and care. After the rain, a rainbow appeared, stretching across the sky in brilliant colors. Evan stood in awe, feeling a sense of wonder he had not felt in years. The world, he realized, was full of beauty and moments of magic, but he had been too busy to notice. The land had taught him to slow his heart, to see what was around him and to feel it fully. The rainbow was not just a natural phenomenon. It was a symbol of the lessons he was learning, the patience and presence that were reshaping his life. In the following days, Evan began to reflect more deeply on his own habits and choices. He wrote in his notebook about the life he had left behind, the pressures he had carried, and the fear that had driven him to move so fast. Writing became a form of meditation, a way to organize his thoughts and understand himself. He did not judge his past, but he faced it honestly. He wrote about regrets, missed opportunities, and mistakes, but he also wrote about hopes, possibilities, and the things he wanted to carry forward. Each word on the page was a step toward understanding, a way to slow his heart and mind further. One afternoon, Evan joined his uncle in repairing a section of fence that had been damaged by fallen branches during the storm. The work required focus, patience, and collaboration. As they hammered posts and tied wires, they talked quietly about life, family, and the land. His uncle shared stories of his own youth, of challenges he had faced, and of lessons he had learned. Evan listened intently, realizing that wisdom was often hidden in simple acts and everyday experiences. The land, the work, and the stories combined to create a sense of continuity, a connection to generations past and present. Evenings became a time for reflection and observation. Evan would sit on the porch sipping tea and watch as the world transitioned from day to night. The sky changed slowly, the stars emerged, and the sounds of nocturnal life filled the air. He realized that the land's rhythm was teaching him more than he had imagined. Patience, presence, and observation were not passive qualities. They were active, powerful ways of engaging with life. By slowing his heart, he was learning to live fully, to see fully, and to feel fully. One particularly quiet evening, Evan walked to the edge of the fields where the river ran. The water moved gently, reflecting the soft light of the setting sun. He sat on a rock, letting the sound of the water fill him. He thought about the city, the work, and the life he had left behind. He realized that his old pace had been exhausting, not because of the work itself, but because he had never allowed himself to be present. In the city, he had rushed through life without noticing it. Here, he could slow down, see the beauty around him, and feel life as it was meant to be felt. Over time, Evan began to notice changes in his relationships. Conversations with his mother became deeper, richer, and more meaningful. His uncle shared more stories, teaching him practical skills and life lessons. Even casual interactions with neighbors and townspeople felt fuller. The quality of attention he gave and received had shifted. He was no longer racing through moments. He was living them. And in this way, he discovered that slowing down did not mean losing connection. It meant strengthening it. One evening, Evan walked alone through the fields, carrying his notebook. He paused at a hilltop, looking out over the land bathed in twilight. The vastness of the fields, the rhythm of the river, and the quiet presence of the trees filled him with a sense of awe. He understood, clearly for the first time, that the land had changed him. His heart was slower, but not weaker. His mind was calmer, but not empty. His spirit felt steadier, more grounded. He realized that this place had given him a gift he could carry forward, no matter where he went. As the days continued, Evan knew that his time in the countryside would not last forever. He would return to the city eventually, yet he also understood that he could take the lessons of this land with him. Patience, presence, and the ability to slow his heart were tools he could use anywhere. He realized that the city would no longer control him in the same way. He could work, live, and move with attention and care, without succumbing to the constant rush that had defined his life for so long. In these moments of reflection, Evan finally accepted something he had struggled with for years. Life did not have to be fast to be meaningful. Success was not measured by speed, but by presence. Happiness was not measured by achievement, but by awareness. And love, he realized, was not measured by actions or results, but by attention and care. The land had taught him this lesson, slowly, gently, without force or expectation. It had taught him to slow his heart, to feel life fully, and to live with honesty and awareness. By the end of his 4th week, Evan felt a deep sense of peace. The city, the deadlines, the constant noise, they no longer held power over him. He had learned to move at a different pace, one that allowed him to see, hear, and feel life more deeply. He knew that challenges would come, storms would arrive, and life would continue to demand attention. But he also knew that he could face them with calmness, presence, and strength. The land had given him a rhythm that would guide him forever. Evan knew the time was coming when he would have to leave. The thought filled him with a quiet tension he hadn't felt before. He had grown comfortable here, surrounded by the rhythm of the land, the calm presence of his mother, and the steady guidance of his uncle. Yet, life beyond this small town awaited him. The city would continue to move fast, and his responsibilities could not be ignored forever. Still, Evan felt different now. He was not the man who had arrived weeks ago, restless and anxious. He was slower, steadier, and more aware. He had learned to carry the land within him. The last few days were filled with small, deliberate acts. Evan helped his uncle repair a section of the roof that had begun to leak after a recent rainstorm. He tended the garden one last time, carefully watering the plants, harvesting the remaining vegetables, and making sure everything was in order. His mother prepared meals with him, sharing quiet conversation and laughter that felt lighter than it had when he first arrived. Each moment was a reminder of what he had learned. Patience, attention, and presence were more valuable than speed or achievement. One morning, Evan walked to the top of the hill behind the house. The view stretched endlessly: fields, rivers, forests, and the distant outline of mountains. He breathed deeply, feeling the wind on his face, the warmth of the sun on his skin. Here he could see life in its simplest form, unfolding slowly, steadily, without rush. He thought about the city, the noise, the constant pressure, and realized that he could return without losing the lessons he had learned. He did not have to carry the old stress, the anxiety, or the need to prove himself. The land had shown him a different way to live. As he walked back down the hill, Evan paused by the river. The water moved gently, reflecting the sky above. He sat on a smooth stone, letting the sound of flowing water fill him. He thought about the weeks he had spent here, the quiet mornings, the long walks, the slow work, and the moments of reflection. He understood that these experiences had changed him in ways he could not yet fully describe. His heart had slowed, yes, but it had also grown. He felt a deeper connection to the world, to people, and to himself. That evening, his uncle and mother invited him to sit by the fireplace. The small room glowed with warmth and the soft flicker of flames. They spoke quietly about memories, the past, and the future. Evan listened, absorbing the stories and lessons shared around him. He felt a sense of gratitude that ran deeper than words could express. The land, the people, and the moments of quiet presence had given him something precious: the ability to live without constant rush, to observe without judgment, and to care without expectation. On the morning of his departure, Evan rose early, as he had for the past weeks. The sky was painted with soft shades of pink and gold. He stepped outside and walked through the fields one last time. The wind moved gently through the grass, the birds sang, and the land seemed to greet him as an old friend. He paused frequently, taking in every detail: the shape of the trees, the color of the soil, the sound of the river in the distance. Each step was intentional, a way of carrying the rhythm of this place into his memory. His mother and uncle waited at the house, carrying small gifts for the journey. His mother handed him a jar of homemade preserves, her hands trembling slightly. "Take this," she said softly. "It will remind you of home." His uncle gave him a hand-carved walking stick, sturdy and smooth. "Walk carefully," he said, "and remember what you've learned here. The land moves at its own pace, and so should you." Evan accepted their gifts with gratitude, realizing that they symbolized more than care. They symbolized connection, patience, and love. As the day progressed, Evan loaded his small bag into the back of his uncle's truck. He hugged his mother tightly, feeling her warmth and strength. She whispered, "Remember, life doesn't always need to be fast. Carry the land with you." He hugged his uncle as well, feeling the steady, unspoken support that had guided him through his weeks here. Evan understood that leaving did not mean abandoning this way of life. It meant carrying it within him, allowing it to shape how he moved forward. The journey back to the city was long and quiet. Evan watched the landscape shift from open fields to clustered homes, from forests to streets, and eventually to the tall buildings and busy avenues of urban life. The contrast was striking, yet Evan felt ready. He had learned that speed and noise did not have to define him. He could move carefully, observe deeply, and carry patience and presence with him wherever he went. The city had not changed, but he had. Upon returning, the familiar chaos greeted him. Crowded streets, honking cars, blinking screens, and constant chatter. But Evan felt a difference inside himself. He no longer panicked at the noise, or felt compelled to rush through every moment. He allowed himself to pause, to notice the details of the world around him, to breathe deeply before acting. He walked with a measured pace, even among the crowds, and observed the faces, the sounds, and the movements around him with quiet attention. The lessons of the land had not been left behind. They were now a part of him. Evan began to adjust his daily life to reflect what he had learned. He limited his screen time, setting aside hours to walk, read, or simply sit quietly. He approached work with focus and care rather than haste. Meetings and tasks were completed thoughtfully, and he allowed himself to rest without guilt. He also began reconnecting with people he had neglected, listening more attentively and speaking with presence. He noticed the difference it made, not just for himself, but for others. People responded to his calm and patience, often reflecting it back in their own behavior. He also continued writing in his notebook, recording thoughts, observations, and reflections. He wrote about the city, the challenges, and the moments of beauty he noticed now that he was moving slower. Writing became a way to maintain the connection to the land, even in the midst of noise. Each word was a reminder to pause, to observe, and to carry the lessons forward. Evan realized that slowing down did not mean stopping life. It meant living it more fully, with awareness, intention, and care. Weeks turned into months, and Evan found a new balance. He traveled to work, maintained responsibilities, and participated in social events, but he no longer allowed the pace of the city to control him. He remembered the land in moments of stress, recalling the quiet mornings, the slow work, the flowing river, and the stars in the night sky. These memories anchored him, giving him the strength to face challenges without losing himself. He had learned that life could be fast or slow, but he could choose the pace that served him best. One evening, Evan visited a park in the city. He walked slowly along a winding path, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant laughter of children. He paused by a small pond, watching ducks glide across the water. He remembered the river behind his uncle's house, the hills and the fields. The memory did not make the city feel smaller or worse. It made him feel more alive. He had learned to carry the land inside him, to move through life with a heart that was steady, aware, and patient. Evan also found himself sharing the lessons he had learned with others. But friends and colleagues noticed his calm presence and asked how he had changed. He spoke of patience, observation, and the value of slowing down. He told stories of the countryside, of quiet mornings, long walks, and simple acts of care. People listened, often reflecting on their own lives, sometimes inspired to slow their own hearts. Evan realized that the land had not only changed him, it had given him a way to influence others positively, without judgment or force. As the years went by, Evan maintained a connection to the countryside. He returned when he could, visiting his mother and uncle, walking the fields and observing the river. Each visit reinforced the lessons he had learned and reminded him of the rhythm he carried within himself. He understood that life would always present challenges, storms, and pressures, but he also knew that he could face them with calm, awareness, and patience. The land had taught him a way of living that no rush or noise could erase. Evan came to see that slowing his heart had not been about avoiding life. It had been about embracing it fully. He had learned to notice the small joys, the quiet moments, and the beauty in ordinary experiences. He had learned that true connection required attention and presence. He had learned that mistakes and regrets were part of life, but they did not have to define him. Most importantly, he had learned that life's pace was not a measure of value, and that slowing down could be the strongest choice of all. In the end, Evan carried the land within him.